saying, "Who fucking Ray? That is it. We're finished. And we're never coming back here again."
That didn't work with all the boys, and we can both think of people who are now in their 20s and 30s who, as happens in any school, they went right through St. Anthony's without touching the sides. None of the spiritual side was picked up. You know, they were quite happy to bend the rules and drink more at Wine Hobby than they should have done. Pick up the fact that Tim had a colourful line in speech and think that that was basically the essence of the man. They'd go home effing and blinding, and the parents would think, well, is that what you're learning at St. Anthony's? Well, people who didn't have a heart or didn't have a brain or both would think, well, that's what I am learning at St. Anthony's. Grow my hair long, get pissed every night and swear like a sailor. But that was the superficial gestalt, and the people with the deeper hearts and stronger wits, I think, saw through that, and I'd like to think have become much more interesting adults as a result of their their time at St. Anthony's.
One thinks of the 60s as being this highly progressive time. In fact, the end of the 60s, sure, but not the beginning. From 1960 to 64, 65, England was a very conservative society, and that was reflected in the school.
It was several years before anyone called me by my first name. What happened was, Nigel is now the headmaster, right? When he was at the top of the school in his last year, his contemporary said to me on the way back from one time from the field, would I rather be called Sir or Tim or Mr. Patton? And I said I'd rather be called Tim because that's my name. But there are teachers here who couldn't handle that. It would be unfair on them. So I said, do what Nigel does. He calls me Sir till 4:30 and Tim after that, right?
Soon it became Tim, just as Sir. And why not? I remained Sir, even with Tim.
His Guinness and Galois test was only half flippant, and never actually mentioned during the job interview itself, but always fondly remembered later in the pub. He reckoned that if a young master came to him smoking Galois and drinking Guinness, that the chap had to be all right.
It wasn't that I recruited in the most obscure places, but I felt if people had done things that were interesting with their lives, I would ask them how much they travelled. And if they had travelled, then I felt they would probably like to be more interesting in the classroom.
We were there for a good time. We loved the boys. Everybody really committed to doing the best we could by the boys, working with each other. And Tim was at the centre of that beating heart, fueling everybody's perception that that's what life was about, not corporate balance sheets and bottom lines and so on, but investing in the future by inspiring the next generation and having a good old crack down the pub at the end of the day.
Tim was just like some sort of mythical figure from across the road. We heard about him mainly through Mr. B, Mr. Bellamy, telling us about this geezer across the road, and then you enter the senior school. I'd knock tentatively at the door, like generations of Antonian boys before and after. And I wait, a light, red or white, and then enter. I find myself now in a room changed in many, many ways.
If a set designer on a movie put together a study like that for a charismatic teacher, you would say, you're fired, and you'd get another set designer in, because it was completely over the top.
Entering this room, it wasn't like coming into a room, really. It wasn't really a place or even a physical space. It was more like entering Tim's state of mind.
It's just end.
personal.
Organised, but it's lucky, if you know what I mean.
There was a real sort of hippie vibe.
Totally eccentric and wonderful.
Amazing Lord of the Rings candles.
His desk would be just here, again with mountains, skyscrapers of papers, God knows how old, some of them sort of decomposing at the bottom of his ink tray, if that's what it was. These blinds, these curtains and whatever, these wooden panels would be down, and Tim would be standing in front of his desk. There'd be strobe lighting perhaps, and maybe also ultraviolet, so everyone looked particularly sinister and weird. Your teeth would be gleaming. The white figurine on your black tight clothing would stand up. Your face paint, if you're wearing face paint, would just make you look like some ghoul. And if you're one of the unfortunate ones, you'd be the one called upon first to get up and just improvise.
You know, you have to put yourself on a bit of a line, don't you? And Tim was always prepared. I mean, there was many a time when Tim was like, you know, pushing us almost to put on the makeup and put on your costume. And secretly you're thinking, well, I wish I was just the person who's like walking along the street and watching this rather than having to go putting those bloody tights on again and being barefoot in the street. And, you know, we used to have bruises, you know, on 2 shows a day in the street, you got bruises, you know, all that flapping about, you know.
He was off the wall and he sort of encouraged people to be like that, which was really good. I mean, I felt I had quite a complex relationship with Tim because I loved the school and I loved what he created, but I wasn't part of, there was a sort of inner circle of the mime people and all that, I wasn't part of that. And he clearly had, there were things that he really cared about and he wanted the school to be like. And it had this incredible freedom, but there were also, you had to sort of, there was still a sort of certain way you were expected to be free and so on. And I think that was why it was sort of, it was complicated how it was free and how people were encouraged to be different and eccentric. I mean, it was kind of, you know, to some extent, that was the establishment, was that you ought to be a little bit eccentric and so on.
The whole outgoing nature of Tim's personality rubbed off on everything in the school. So if you weren't particularly outgoing, you were kind of left behind. And a lot of my close friends from that school, you know, have had very disparaging comments to make about their time there. And that was because they were shy, introverted kids who felt they couldn't really live up to, you know, a lot of their contemporaries.
Adam always said there was one boy, Nick, who really used to give Tim back as much as he got. And it seems to me that Tim really liked that. You know, he was always saying, you know, you're out of this school, you're out of it. Yeah, and then Nick would shout, you know, I bloody well wish I was out of it, mate. And, you know, that must have been really exciting from a kid's point of view. And I think there was an element of him wanting to make men out of these kids, wanting them, in a sense, to be equal with their teachers, but still have respect. I think that was a lot of his philosophy there.
No, see, if you ring a number and it's engaged, or you get through. So if you want to ring it again, press L. Huh?
When I was quite young, say 11 or something, I remember walking into school wearing my grandfather's First World War flak jacket, some sort of relic from the First World War. I had military signs on it. I walked into, it was cold and it was a warm jacket, so that's why I was wearing it. And he bawled me out because it smacked of militarism and that whole ethos, and he hated that. And I felt, well, you know, I wore it because it was cold, not because I wanted to join the army or anything like that. And to some extent, he would blow things which were small and insignificant out of proportion. On the other hand, I've always remembered that and always, well, I don't think I've ever worn anything military since, but why can't I? You know?
When I heard some of the things that he'd said to them, you know, when they'd done things wrong, I must say I blanched visibly and my chequebook began to tremble. The thought of next term. Yeah, you know, I remember Adam saying that they went out to buy a book for prize giving, and two of them bought the same book by mistake. And Tim had them both against the wall, you know, saying, you know, what are you? What are you? And I'm a sir, you know. And I'm just, you know, sort of, you know, white face at the thought of my little tender flower.
If I felt that I'd upset a boy in school, I apologised. If I knew I was wrong, I apologised, right? Always. But it would have been better not to upset in the first place. It would have been better to have taken them aside and say, look, it isn't you that I'm angry with, it's your behaviour. And I don't think I necessarily did that enough or was aware enough of that. That's something I've learned since I've been here. I think all the time you learn, right? So yes, I might have done things differently. I might have perhaps not hurt someone by shouting, right? Right, if I go through quickly, right, what we're going to do. Beach machine, French Kazi machine, the photo story of Peter the Fincher, pub machine, nightmare machine, guillotine machine, which Tommy wrote. It's a bit chaotic, but it's all right.
Good morning, this is the 8 o'clock news. The pet anaconda that escaped from Dublin Zoo was found wrapped around the upper thigh of Miss Maureen O'Shaughnessy. She was ironing at the time.
He could surprise. There was this time when he asked people, one of his English lessons when we were down in his room, the same room where we'd had some of these performances that I didn't like, and he asked people about their definition of happiness. It was one of those questions, you know, and this was where, you know, there was, I think, you know, Tim had these expectations and a certain ethic and aesthetic, and people gave answers to some extent to that question when he asked it that would fit with our perception of his aesthetic. So there was lots of stuff about sort of, I don't know, sort of giving help to people in need and all this kind of stuff. And then my actually guy who was my best friend, a guy called Filippo, who wasn't at all part of, wasn't sort of one of Tim's favourites or anything like that, came out with this answer, which was that his definition of happiness was on a cold winter's night, getting into bed, into sort of cold sheets with a hot water bottle at the bottom of the bed. And Tim just latched onto that, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant because it was by far the best answer, and it was the only, everybody else was being really pretentious and sort of coming out with this bullshit, and Lipo came out with this brilliant answer, and Tim was like, that's the definition of happiness, that's brilliant, and he really loved that, and that was brilliant, and that he identified that as the best one, and he was sort of, you know, he sort of veered, I think, between being sometimes he could be a bit pretentious and all that, and sometimes like absolutely bang on about what was good and what wasn't good.
Grateful Dead and E.T.